This is a video tutorial for Phil 123, Module 6 on identity and possibility. Both identity and possibility are kind of technical philosophical terms, and what's worse is they're kind of ambiguous. A lot of times when we say that something's possible or we say that two things are identical, we mean different things, not just in philosophy but in everyday language. So I want to spend at least a little bit of time talking about these terms, possibility and identity, and distinguishing them, explaining exactly what we might mean when we're using those terms. Now let's talk about identity first, because we're going to be, this discussion occurs in a unit on personal identity. There's three questions that we're going to be wondering about in this particular module. We're going to wonder what it is to be a person in the first place. We're going to wonder what it is to be the same person, say over time. What is it to be the same person now as you were when you were 8 years old? Was it to say that you will be the same person next week that you are now? And finally, we're going to wonder whether it's possible to survive the death of the physical body. Okay? To be able to answer those questions, we got to understand the terms identity on the one hand and possible on the other. So let's start with the term identity. Now, in everyday English, it's interesting to note how we sometimes use the word identity. Think about how we think of identical twins. Okay? I'm a twin myself. I'm not an identical twin, but I've certainly known identical twins in my life. In fact, one of my best friends is married to an identical twin. Megan and Melissa, the twins, are indistinguishable. Okay, I can't tell one from the other. If you met them, you would not be able to tell one from the other. Their mom seems to be able to figure it out. Their husbands seem to be able to figure it out. But to you and I, they're absolutely indistinguishable. They're identical twins. And what we mean when we say that is presumably that they're indistinguishable from one another. There's also, a genetic thing to the equation, but ignore that for the moment. That said, even though Megan and Melissa are indistinguishable from one another, nobody thinks they're the exact same person. Okay, they have similar personalities, but they're not the same person. My friend Eric is married to Megan, not Melissa. Now, this actually tracks the kind of distinction that I'm interested in when we're talking about identity. Sometimes when we're talking about identity, when we say that two things are identical, we mean that they're qualitatively identical. When we say that two things are identical over time, we mean that they're qualitatively identical over time. Okay. In this case, what we mean when we say that two things are qualitatively identical is simply that they're indistinguishable. If we say of a 40-year-old that she's identical to who she was when she was 20, one thing that we might mean is that she looks the same, that it doesn't look like she's aged at all. That's the sense of qualitative identity that we're interested in. But there's another sense of identity that we might be interested in. This is the sense of numerical identity. To say that two things are numerically identical is to say not that they're indistinguishable, but they're the exact same thing. Think of several examples here. Think about your car to start out. You might change things about your car over time. You might get it painted, you might add accessories to it, you might replace some parts. But it's still your car. If you take your car to the DMV, they're going to say, yep, it's your car. It doesn't belong to someone else, it belongs to you. Even if you change its appearance, it's still the exact same thing. By contrast, think about something like Superman and Clark Kent. They're not qualitatively identical. They don't look the same. Lois Lane sees Superman and she thinks he's handsome and dreamy. She looks at Clark Kent and she thinks he's kind of ordinary and a bit of a wimp. But nonetheless, Clark Kent and Superman are the exact same person. Those names, Superman and Clark Kent, pick out the exact same guy. When Superman and Clark Kent are in the room, there's just one person, not two. That's numerical identity. They're the exact same person. So we want to keep these two senses of the word identity separate because things can get confusing. When we're talking about personal identity, when we're wondering what it is to be the same person over time, what we're asking is what is it to be the numerically same person over time. We're not really that interested in qualitative identity. Just because two people look alike does not mean they're the same person. Again, think of identical twins here. When we're asking whether someone's the same person, say over time, we're asking whether they're numerically identical to some other person. Okay? So personal identity consists of numerical identity, just applied to the case of persons. Now we'll see in the next module or sorry, in the next video tutorial for this module, 3 different conceptions of what personal identity consists in. But I'll talk about those in the next tutorial. What I want to talk about as well is the different senses of possibility that are in play, different senses of the word possible. That's going to matter because early on in the dialogues concerning personal identity, a very helpful dialogue to illustrate those 3 different conceptions we'll be talking about, one of the characters, who's dying, challenges her friends who are there to comfort her and promises to be comforted, and this is the last quote on that particular handout, if they can make the case that surviving the death of her body is possible. And she means, quoting now, "I do not mean possible in the sense of likely or even in the sense of conforming to the known laws of physics or biology. I mean possible only in the weakest sense of being conceivable, given the unavoidable facts." So we already see there's different senses of the word possible that are in play here, and I want to distinguish between them. Let's start out with what we will call gnomic possibility. Gnomic possibility has its root word in the Greek word nomos, N-O-M-O-S, and nomos means roughly law, as in law of nature, not the laws of man, but the laws of nature. Think about the basic laws of physics here. Think about Newton's laws or the laws of thermodynamics, or some of the more prosaic kinds of laws of nature that we're familiar with. To say that something's gnomically possible is just to say it's possible given the laws of nature. Okay? To say that something's gnomically impossible is to say that it's ruled out, it's forbidden by the laws of nature. It is gnomically impossible that water should boil at 180 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not how the world works. It is gnomically impossible, according to the laws of nature, that I could jump over the 3rd floor of Brown Hall on SVSU campus. Given the way things are, it's not going to happen. Okay? So that's gnomic possibility and impossibility. But notice there's lots of things that are gnomically impossible that we might still talk about. It's gnomically impossible for me to jump over Brown Hall, but is it possible in some interesting sense? It's certainly logically possible. To say that something's logically possible is to just say it's possible given the laws of logic, not the laws of nature, but the laws of logic. To say that something's logically impossible is to say that it's impossible given the laws of logic. Now, the rules of logic do rule some stuff out. It's logically impossible that it could be raining and not raining at the same time. That's a contradiction, and anything that's a contradiction is ruled out by the laws of logic. It also can't be the case that certain things that are true by definition should be otherwise. Example, a bachelor is, by definition, an unmarried man. It is logically impossible that a bachelor should be married. You get the idea. But still, there's lots of things that are logically possible, even if they're not, say, gnomically possible. There's no logical contradiction in saying that I could jump over 3rd floor Brown Hall. There's no logical contradiction in saying that water boils at 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Those are things that are logically possible, even if they're unlikely or impossible given the laws of nature, that is, gnomically impossible. Okay? It's not clear it works the other way, by the way. It's not clear that there's anything that's gnomically possible that's logically impossible. If it's permitted by the laws of nature, it's permitted by the laws of logic as well. Now, the most interesting sense of the word possibility is what we might call conceptual possibility. What is it to be conceivable? Well, that's actually a good question. To say that something's conceivable, really conceivable, is just to say that we can intelligibly and intelligently imagine it. Not just everything's conceivable. There might be limits on what we can conceive of. It's logically possible, for example, that there's a 1,000-sided plane figure in Euclidean geometry. It wouldn't be a triangle with 3 sides. It wouldn't be a square with 4 sides or a pentagon with 5 sides. It would be a 1,000-sided figure. I think this is called a chilagon, but I'm not positive. It might be that conceiving of a chilagon is just too difficult for us. Nonetheless, it's logically possible. Now, why do I say conceptual possibility is the really interesting one? Partly because people disagree about what conceivability requires. We'll see this debate come up in the second night and third night in particular in Perry's dialogue, in particular whether we can really conceive of what it would be like to survive the death of our physical bodies. But it's interesting for another reason as well. An awful lot of people, not everyone, but an awful lot of philosophers think there's a relationship between conceptual possibility on the one hand and logical possibility on the other. That if you can conceive of it, if it's conceivably possible, then it's logically possible as well. Now again, there's debates about this, but we're going to sort of go with it for the time being. So, one of our questions, can you survive the death of the physical body? Is that possible? Turns on this relationship. Well, if it's certainly not nomically possible, but if we can conceive of it, then it's conceptually possible, and then it might be logically possible as well.